Every parent's worst nightmare became Jake Nolan's reality in a single heartbeat. The love a father has for his child can make him do the impossible, even sacrifice everything to save her life. Jake was walking his 8-year-old daughter Emma home from school when a speeding car came racing toward them. Without thinking, he pushed Emma to safety and took the full impact himself. The accident left Jake paralyzed from the waist down with crushing medical bills and the fear of losing custody of Emma. Everyone expected the wealthy family whose son was driving to send lawyers and money to make the problem go away. Instead, Olivia Langford showed up at Jake's door with something nobody saw coming. She didn't come with just money or apologies. She came with a plan that would change both their lives forever. But what happens when two broken people discover that healing comes from giving, not just receiving? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the small duplex on Maple Street, casting gentle shadows across the worn hardwood floors that Jake Nolan had refinished himself 3 summers ago. The house wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, but it was theirs. Every creaking floorboard, every paint chip on the windowsill, every carefully budgeted improvement told the story of a man who understood that home wasn't about square footage or fancy fixtures. It was about love, consistency, and the kind of safety that money couldn't buy. Jake's construction foreman badge sat on the kitchen counter where he'd placed it the night before, right next to Emma's math homework and a grocery list written in his careful, deliberate handwriting. The badge bore his name in simple block letters, Jake Nolan, site supervisor, and represented 15 years of working his way up from general laborer to the man other men looked to for answers. It wasn't a glamorous job, and it certainly wasn't going to make him wealthy, but it was honest work that paid enough to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. At 34, Jake had the kind of weathered hands that spoke of real labor, calloused palms, a thin scar across his left knuckle from a sheet metal mishap, fingernails that stayed permanently stained despite his best efforts with industrial soap. His face carried the early lines of someone who'd shouldered responsibility young, but his green eyes still held warmth and the quick spark of humor that made Emma giggle during their evening routines. "Dad, I can't find my blue sweater," came Emma's voice from her bedroom, carrying that particular note of 8-year-old distress that suggested this was a genuine crisis. "Check the laundry basket in the hall closet, sweetheart," Jake called back, not looking up from where he was packing her lunch. Peanut butter and jelly strawberry, never grape, because Emma had decided at age 5 that grape jelly was too purple, an apple cut into slices, a juice box, and exactly 3 chocolate chip cookies from the batch they'd made together on Sunday. The lunch preparation was part of their morning rhythm, as predictable and comforting as sunrise. Jake had learned early in his single-parenting journey that children thrived on routine, on knowing what came next. Emma's backpack sat ready by the front door, homework completed and double-checked the night before. Her school clothes were laid out on the dresser, jeans without holes, a t-shirt without stains, sneakers that Jake had scrubbed clean with an old toothbrush. "Found it." Emma emerged from the hallway wearing the blue cardigan her grandmother had knitted before she passed away 2 years ago. It was getting small on her, the sleeves stopping just past her wrists, but Emma refused to give it up. Jake understood. Sometimes the things that connected you to people you'd lost were more valuable than perfect fit. Emma had her mother's dark hair, thick and prone to tangles that required patience and YouTube tutorials Jake had watched at midnight to master. Her eyes were his green with flecks of gold, but her smile was entirely her own, wide and uninhibited and capable of making even his hardest days feel manageable. She was small for her age, a fact that worried Jake more than he let on, but what she lacked in size she made up for in fierce determination and an endless capacity for questions. "Can we walk the long way today?" she asked, settling into her chair at the small kitchen table. "I want to see if Mrs. Patterson's cat had her babies yet." Jake smiled, setting her plate in front of her scrambled eggs, toast cut into triangles, and orange juice in the plastic cup she'd chosen herself at the dollar store. "Sure, but eat your breakfast first, and remember, we can only look. Mrs. Patterson doesn't like people bothering Whiskers when she's got new babies." This was their world, small moments, careful routines, the 1,000 tiny considerations that made up a life built for two on a foundation that had never quite felt stable. Jake's ex-wife, Sarah, had left when Emma was 3, unable to handle what she called the weight of it all. She'd signed away her parental rights without a fight, leaving behind only a forwarding address in California and a daughter who sometimes asked why other kids had mommies and she didn't. Jake had learned to be enough. He'd mastered the art of French braids through trial and error, figured out the difference between a fever that meant stay home and one that meant doctor visit, navigated parent-teacher conferences and playground politics, and the particular heartbreak of watching your child eat lunch alone. He'd become an expert in bedtime stories, nightmare management, and the delicate negotiations required to get an 8-year-old to eat vegetables. The duplex they called home sat in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone's business, but in the best possible way. Mrs. Chen next door brought over containers of soup when Emma had the flu. Old Mr. Rodriguez across the street kept an eye on their place when Jake worked late. The mailman, Dennis, always had a joke ready for Emma, and the crossing guard at the elementary school knew her by name. Jake's salary as a construction foreman was enough for the basics, but it required constant vigilance. Every purchase was considered, every expense weighed against necessity. Emma's shoes came from the discount store, her school supplies from the back-to-school sales in August. Jake drove a 10-year-old pickup truck that he maintained himself in the driveway, watching YouTube videos to learn how to replace brake pads and change oil. Vacations meant camping in state parks, eating hot dogs cooked over a fire, sleeping in a tent that Jake had bought second-hand from a co-worker. But they were happy. Emma thrived in school, made friends easily, and never seemed to notice that her clothes came from thrift stores or that their television was 15 years old. Jake had taught her to find joy in simple things, library books, sidewalk chalk, the ritual of making pancakes shaped like animals on Saturday mornings. She knew the names of every construction worker on Jake's crew and could recite the safety rules Jake had drilled into her head since she was old enough to understand. "Dad?" Emma looked up from her eggs, a serious expression crossing her face. "Tommy Martinez says his mom is getting married again, and now he's going to have a stepdad. Do you think you'll ever get married?" The question hit Jake like a physical blow, though he kept his expression neutral. Marriage was a luxury he couldn't afford to consider. Dating required time he didn't have, money he couldn't spare, and energy that belonged entirely to Emma. Besides, his track record suggested he wasn't particularly good at picking partners who stayed. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "Right now, you and I make a pretty good team, don't we?" Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. "We do. But if you did get married, I think she should like construction sites and know how to make chocolate chip cookies. Those are definitely important qualifications," Jake agreed, swallowing the lump in his throat. Sometimes Emma's matter-of-fact acceptance of their situation amazed him. Other times, it broke his heart. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, Emma humming a song she'd learned in music class while Jake mentally reviewed his day. The Morrison project needed to be wrapped up by Friday, which meant pushing his crew hard while maintaining safety standards. The Henderson renovation was starting next week, and Jake still needed to finalize the materials order. Mrs. Kowalski had called about repair work on her back porch, and Jake had promised to stop by over the weekend to give her an estimate. After breakfast, Emma brushed her teeth while Jake packed his lunch leftovers from dinner, a thermos of coffee, and an apple. His work boots sat by the door, steel-toed and scuffed from countless job sites. His tool belt hung on a hook in the hallway, familiar weight of hammer, measuring tape, and utility knife. This was his uniform, his identity, the tangible proof that he was providing for his daughter. "Ready, Dad?" Emma appeared with her backpack, face washed, hair brushed, that blue sweater making her look even smaller than usual. They stepped out into the crisp October morning, Emma's hand finding his automatically. The walk to Jefferson Elementary was 12 blocks, a distance Jake had measured carefully when deciding to rent the duplex. Close enough that Emma could walk home with friends if needed, far enough to give them time to talk, plan their day, and simply be together. This was the life Jake had built from scratch, one careful decision at a time. It wasn't the life he'd imagined at 22, when he'd thought about marriage and fatherhood in abstract terms. It was smaller, more fragile, held together by determination and love, and the kind of daily vigilance that comes with knowing you're the only safety net your child has. As they walked down Maple Street, Emma chattering about a book report she had to give next week, Jake felt the familiar mixture of pride and anxiety that colored most of his days. He was doing it, raising a daughter alone, keeping her safe and happy and loved. But he was always one accident, one injury, one economic downturn away from having it all fall apart. He had no way of knowing that in less than an hour, everything would change. That the careful life he'd built would be shattered in an instant, and the very love that had made him strong enough to do this alone would lead him to make a choice that would transform both their lives forever. For now, it was just another Tuesday morning, Emma's hand in his, the autumn sun warm on their faces, and the simple joy of a father walking his daughter to school. The accident happened at 3:47 p.m. on Elm Street, just 3 blocks from Jefferson Elementary School. Jake had left the Morrison construction site early to pick up Emma from school, something he'd been doing every Tuesday since her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had mentioned that Emma seemed a little down on the days she had to walk home alone. It was a small adjustment to his schedule, but one that Jake made gladly. Those extra 20 minutes with Emma, hearing about her day while it was still fresh in her mind, had become one of his favorite parts of the week. Emma was bubbling with excitement as they walked, her backpack bouncing against her thin shoulders with each enthusiastic step. She'd gotten an A on her spelling test, all 20 words spelled correctly, and Mrs. Rodriguez had put a gold star sticker next to her name on the classroom chart. And then Tommy Martinez spelled through like through, and he got so mad he crumpled up his paper. Emma was saying, her green eyes bright with the drama of second-grade politics. But Mrs. Rodriguez told him it was okay because lots of people mess up those words. Jake smiled, adjusting his grip on his lunch cooler. The October afternoon was perfect crisp, but not cold, with the kind of golden light that made even the modest neighborhood houses look warm and inviting. A few maple trees were showing their autumn colors, red and orange leaves drifting down to crunch under their feet. "What did you tell Tommy?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. Emma had inherited his tendency to root for the underdog, and he was always interested in how she handled social situations at school. "I told him my dad says mistakes are just practice for getting it right next time," Emma said matter-of-factly, "and that you've spelled lots of words wrong before too." "Thanks for sharing that information," Jake said with mock indignation, making Emma giggle. "I'll remember that the next time you ask me to help with homework." They were crossing Elm Street at the corner of Pine when Jake heard it, the sound of an engine racing, growing louder too quickly. He looked up from Emma's animated face to see a dark blue BMW sedan speeding toward the intersection, showing no signs of slowing for the stop sign that clearly marked the four-way stop. Time seemed to slow in that moment, the way it does when your mind processes danger faster than your body can react. Jake saw the car, saw the teenager behind the wheel, looking down at something in his lap, a phone. Jake realized with horror, saw the exact trajectory that would bring 2 tons of metal directly into the path where he and Emma were walking. "Emma!" The word tore from his throat as he grabbed his daughter around the waist and threw her toward the sidewalk with every ounce of strength in his body. She flew several feet, landing hard on the grass strip between the sidewalk and street, her backpack scattering its contents, notebooks, pencils, and the spelling test with its proud gold star. Jake felt the car hit him before he heard it. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him spinning through the air, his lunch cooler exploding open and scattering its contents across the asphalt. He hit the ground hard, and then everything went dark. When consciousness returned, Jake's first awareness was of voices urgent, professional voices speaking in the clipped tones of emergency responders. His second awareness was of pain, but it was wrong somehow, incomplete. He could feel agony in his head, his ribs, his left shoulder, but below his waist there was nothing, nothing at all. "Sir, can you hear me? Sir, I need you to stay still." A paramedic's face appeared in his field of vision, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. "You've been in an accident. We're going to take care of you." "Emma," Jake managed, his voice coming out as a croak. "My daughter. Where's my daughter?" "She's okay," the paramedic said quickly. "She's right over there with another EMT. She's scared, but she's not seriously hurt. You got her out of the way." Jake turned his head with tremendous effort and saw Emma sitting on the curb, wrapped in a blanket, tears streaming down her face. A young male EMT was crouched beside her, speaking in gentle tones, but Emma's eyes were fixed on Jake with an expression of terror he'd never seen before. Can I talk to her?" Jake asked. The paramedic glanced toward her partner, who was working on Jake's lower body, though Jake couldn't feel whatever he was doing. "Let's get you stabilized first, okay? She knows you're alive and talking. That's the most important thing right now." As they worked around him, Jake began to piece together what had happened from the conversations of the police officers and witnesses gathering at the scene. The driver was 17 years old, the son of a prominent local family. He'd been texting while driving and never saw the stop sign. Several witnesses confirmed that Jake had pushed Emma to safety just before the impact. The hospital bracelet they fastened around Jake's wrist felt cold against his skin. A plastic band with his name, date of birth, and a series of numbers that would come to define his new reality. Patient ID 247,891. Room assignment pending. Next of kin, Emma Nolan, minor daughter. The ambulance ride to Regional Medical Center passed in a blur of sirens and concerned voices. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, each time waking to ask about Emma, each time being assured she was following in a separate ambulance with only minor scrapes and bruises. It wasn't until Jake was lying in a hospital bed 12 hours later, after surgery to stabilize his spine, that a doctor with tired eyes and gentle hands delivered the news that would reshape everything. "Mr. Nolan, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I've been overseeing your care since you arrived." She pulled up a chair beside his bed, a gesture Jake would later recognize as the universal signal that bad news was coming. "The accident caused severe trauma to your spinal cord at the lone vertebra. We've done everything we can to minimize the damage, but I need to be honest with you about what this means." Jake's mouth felt dry as cotton. "I can't feel my legs." "No," Dr. Chen said quietly, "and I'm afraid that's not going to change. The damage to your spinal cord is complete. You're going to be paralyzed from the waist down." The words hit Jake like a second impact, stealing his breath and leaving him staring at the ceiling tiles. Paralyzed. The word seemed impossible, too big and terrible to apply to his life. He was Jake Nolan. He climbed scaffolding, carried 100-pound loads, spent his days on his feet, directing crews and solving problems with his hands. "What does that mean exactly?" he heard himself ask, his voice sounding strange and distant. Dr. Chen explained with professional compassion: wheelchair, extensive rehabilitation, home modifications, lifestyle changes. The words washed over Jake like water, most of them incomprehensible in that moment. But one phrase cut through his shock like a blade: significant challenges with independent living. "I have a daughter," Jake said suddenly. "Emma. She's 8. It's just the two of us." "Doctor," Chen's expression softened further. "I know. She's been asking about you constantly. She's with your neighbor right now, Mrs. Chen. No relation." She came as soon as she heard. Relief flooded through Jake at the mention of Mrs. Chen from next door. Emma knew her, trusted her. She would be safe for now. But beyond that immediate comfort lay a chasm of fear so deep Jake couldn't bear to look into it. How could he take care of Emma when he couldn't even take care of himself? How could he work construction from a wheelchair? How would they pay for his medical care, let alone the modifications he'd need to make to their home? The duplex on Maple Street had steps leading to the front door, narrow hallways, a bathroom too small for a wheelchair. And worst of all, what if the authorities decided he couldn't provide adequate care for Emma anymore? What if they took her away? The hospital bracelet around Jake's wrist suddenly felt like a shackle, marking him as broken, dependent, fundamentally changed from the man who had walked his daughter to school that morning. In the space of a few seconds, everything that had defined him, his strength, his independence, his ability to provide, had been stripped away. But Emma was alive. That was the only thing that mattered, Jake told himself fiercely. Emma was alive because he had been there, because he had been strong enough and fast enough and brave enough to save her. Whatever came next, whatever he had to face, that would always be true. As night fell outside his hospital window, Jake stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine a future he couldn't yet comprehend. While 3 floors below in the emergency room, a 17-year-old boy sat with his wealthy parents, giving his statement to police and beginning to understand that his moment of carelessness had changed 2 lives forever. 3 weeks into his stay at Regional Medical Center's rehabilitation wing, Jake had learned to hate the sound of wheels on linoleum. Every morning brought the same ritual physical therapy sessions that left him exhausted and frustrated. Occupational therapy that focused on relearning basic tasks he'd done without thinking for 34 years. Counseling sessions where well-meaning professionals tried to help him process his grief for his former life. The stack of medical bills grew higher each day on the rolling table beside his bed. Even with the basic insurance provided through his construction job, the numbers were staggering. Emergency surgery, ICU stay, rehabilitation, physical therapy, occupational therapy. Each service generated another invoice that Jake studied with growing desperation. The total was already approaching 6 figures, and he wasn't even close to being discharged. Emma visited every day after school, brought by Mrs. Chen or other neighbors who had rallied around them in the wake of the accident. She would sit on the edge of his bed, carefully avoiding the various tubes and monitors, and tell him about her day with the determined cheerfulness of a child trying to make everything normal through sheer force of will. "Tommy Martinez brought a lizard to school today," she said during one visit, her legs swinging from the chair that was slightly too tall for her. Mrs. Rodriguez said it was a gecko, and they can walk on walls because they have special sticky feet. "Do you think that would hurt if you tried to peel them off the wall?" Jake smiled, grateful for her ability to find wonder in everyday things. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Their feet work differently than ours." "Good," Emma said seriously. "I wouldn't want to hurt a lizard by accident." The innocence of her concern made Jake's chest tight. Emma was trying so hard to act normal, but he could see the changes in her. She was thinner, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she wasn't sleeping well. Mrs. Chen had mentioned that Emma had started having nightmares about cars, waking up crying and asking if Daddy was okay. Dr. Patel, his rehabilitation physician, had been honest about the challenges ahead. Jake would need a wheelchair, initially a hospital-style model, eventually a lightweight version designed for daily use. His duplex would require significant modifications: ramps, wider doorways, a redesigned bathroom. He'd need handrails, accessible kitchen appliances, and a bedroom on the first floor, since he'd never be able to navigate stairs again. The estimated cost for home modifications alone was $30,000. Jake's savings account had exactly $4,312. "Mr. Nolan?" A A social worker named Patricia Williams appeared in his doorway, clipboard in hand. She was a thin woman in her 50s, with grey hair and kind but tired eyes. Jake had learned to dread her visits, though she was always gentle in her approach. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, settling into the visitor's chair. "Like I got hit by a car," Jake said dryly, then immediately regretted the joke when he saw her expression. Gallows humor wasn't appreciated in the world of social services. "I wanted to talk with you about Emma's living situation," Patricia said, consulting her clipboard. "Mrs. Chen has been wonderful, but this arrangement can't continue indefinitely. We need to start planning for your discharge and Emma's long-term care." The words Jake had been dreading hung in the air between them. Long-term care, as if Emma were the one who needed taking care of, instead of the father who was supposed to protect and provide for her. "I'll be able to take care of her," Jake said firmly, "once I get home and get settled." Patricia's expression was sympathetic but skeptical. "Mr. Nolan, I've reviewed your case extensively. Your home currently isn't accessible for wheelchair use. You'll need significant modifications that insurance typically doesn't cover. Your job as a construction foreman obviously can't continue, and you haven't identified alternative employment options." Each point hit like a physical blow. Jake knew she was right, but hearing it laid out so starkly made his chest feel tight with panic. "There are excellent foster families in the area," Patricia continued gently. "People specifically trained to care for children who've experienced trauma. Emma could stay with them while you focus on your recovery and getting back on your feet." "No." The word came out harder than Jake intended. "I'm not giving up my daughter." "It wouldn't be giving up. It would be temporary. Until you're able to provide adequate care." I said no. Jake's voice carried a finality that made Patricia sit back slightly. "Emma stays with me. I'll figure out the rest." After Patricia left, Jake stared at the stack of medical bills with new eyes. The numbers that had seemed impossible before now felt like a prison sentence. He picked up the phone and called his insurance company, spending an hour navigating automated systems and hold music before finally reaching a human being who confirmed his worst fears. His coverage had a lifetime maximum that he was rapidly approaching. Once he hit that ceiling, he'd be responsible for every dollar. His construction crew had taken up a collection that totaled $800, a gesture that touched Jake deeply while highlighting how inadequate it was against his mounting expenses. The mortgage on the duplex was current for now, but only because Mrs. Chen had been paying it out of his checking account, using the emergency authorization he'd given her. His savings were draining fast between living expenses and the portion of medical bills insurance didn't cover. Jake had always been the type of man who solved problems through hard work and determination. But this wasn't a problem he could fix by working longer hours or pushing through pain. This was a fundamental shift in what his life could be, and every practical consideration pointed toward the same devastating conclusion. He might not be able to keep Emma. The thought made him nauseous. Emma was everything to him, his reason for getting up in the morning, his motivation to be better, his greatest accomplishment. The idea of some well-meaning social worker deciding he wasn't capable of caring for his own daughter felt like a kind of death. During his physical therapy session that afternoon, Jake attacked the exercises with new intensity. Learning to transfer from bed to wheelchair, from wheelchair to toilet, from wheelchair to car, each movement was clumsy and exhausting, but he pushed through with grim determination. His therapist, a cheerful woman named Monica, encouraged his sudden enthusiasm while cautioning him about overexertion. "This isn't a race, Jake," she said, as he struggled to complete another transfer. "Recovery takes time." "I don't have time," Jake muttered, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. "I need to get home to my daughter." That evening, as Emma sat beside his bed working on homework while he pretended to watch television, Jake made a decision. He wouldn't let anyone take Emma away from him. Whatever it took, borrowing money, Selling everything he owned, moving to a different home, he would find a way to be the father she needed. He just had no idea how impossible that promise would be to keep, or that help would come from the most unexpected source, a woman whose guilt over her son's actions would lead her to do something extraordinary. For now, Jake simply held tight to his determination and tried not to think about the growing stack of bills that threatened to bury them both. The Child Services case file arrived on a grey Thursday morning, delivered by Patricia Williams with an expression that somehow managed to be both apologetic and professional. The manila folder contained Emma Nolan's name, typed in neat black letters across the tab, and seeing his daughter reduced to bureaucratic paperwork made Jake's hands shake as he opened it. "This is just preliminary," Patricia said, settling into the now familiar visitor's chair. "We're required to conduct a formal assessment when there are significant changes to a child's living situation." Jake scanned the documents with growing dread, forms evaluating his capacity to provide adequate care, assessments of Emma's emotional and physical well-being, and questionnaires about everything from his financial stability to his mental health status. Each page felt like another step toward losing the most important thing in his life. "What exactly does this mean?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew. "It means we need to ensure Emma's safety and well-being are protected," Patricia said carefully. "Your circumstances have changed dramatically, Mr. Nolan. We have to evaluate whether you can still provide appropriate care." The phrase, appropriate care, stuck in Jake's throat like a barb. He'd been providing more than appropriate care for Emma since she was 3 years old. He'd been providing everything: love, stability, security, guidance. He'd taught her to ride a bike, helped her with homework, kissed her scraped knees, and held her during thunderstorms. Now, because he couldn't walk, strangers were questioning whether he was fit to be her father. "Emma is fine," Jake said firmly. "She's scared about what happened to me, but she's fine." "Her teacher has noticed some behavioral changes," Patricia said, consulting her notes. "Difficulty concentrating, episodes of crying during class, reluctance to participate in group activities. These are normal responses to trauma, but they're concerning." Jake felt a stab of guilt. Of course, Emma was struggling. She'd watched her father get hit by a car, spent weeks visiting him in the hospital, and was currently living with neighbors while her world fell apart around her. Any child would be having difficulties. "She needs stability," Jake said. "She needs to be with me." "Mr. Nolan, I understand your feelings, but we have to consider practical realities. Your current housing isn't wheelchair accessible. You're facing significant financial challenges. You don't have employment prospects that would allow you to support Emma adequately." Patricia's voice was gentle but relentless. "We're not trying to punish you. We're trying to protect Emma." After Patricia left, Jake called Mrs. Chen to check on Emma. His neighbor's voice was warm but strained. Caring for an 8-year-old on top of her own responsibilities was clearly taking a toll. "She's doing her homework at my kitchen table," Mrs. Chen reported. "But she keeps asking when she can come home. I tell her soon, but Jake, I don't know what to tell her anymore." That afternoon, Jake forced himself to make the calls he'd been avoiding. The mortgage company was surprisingly understanding. They offered a 6-month forbearance that would allow him to skip payments while he figured out his situation. The utility companies were less accommodating, though most agreed to payment plans. His construction company's human resources department was sympathetic but clear. His job required physical capabilities he no longer possessed. They would provide the maximum allowable workers' compensation, but it was a fraction of his former salary and would end after 18 months. Jake spent that evening calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up to anything good. Even if he could find work he could do from a wheelchair, it would likely pay far less than construction. The cost of modifying his home was astronomical. The ongoing medical expenses were crushing, and now he was facing the possibility of legal fees if he had to fight for custody of Emma. The next morning brought a visit from Emma that broke his heart. She climbed carefully onto his bed, moving slowly, as if she were afraid she might hurt him, and curled up against his side. "Daddy, when are we going home?" she asked in a small voice. "Soon, sweetheart," Jake said, stroking her hair. "I'm getting stronger every day. Mrs. Chen is nice, but I miss our house. I miss making pancakes on Saturday mornings. I miss reading stories in my own bed." Emma's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "And kids at school keep asking me questions about the accident, and I don't know what to say." Jake's chest tightened. "What kind of questions? Like if you're ever going to walk again, and if we're going to be poor now, and if I'm going to have to live somewhere else." Emma pulled back to look at him with eyes that seemed too old for her 8-year-old face. "Are we going to be poor, Daddy?" The direct question hit Jake like a physical blow. Emma had always been perceptive, but he'd tried to shield her from adult worries. Now there was no hiding the reality of their situation. "We're going to have some challenges," he said carefully, "but we'll figure it out together. We always do. Is that why that lady with the clipboard keeps asking me questions about whether I feel safe, and whether I have enough to eat, and whether anyone ever hurts me?" Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jake could hear the underlying anxiety. "She's just making sure you're okay," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's her job." "I told her I want to go home with you," Emma said firmly. "I told her you're the best daddy in the world and you would never let anyone hurt me." The absolute faith in her voice made Jake want to cry. Emma believed in him completely, trusted him to fix this situation the way he'd fixed every other problem in her young life. But this wasn't a broken toy, or a scraped knee, or a nightmare that could be chased away with stories and songs. This was bigger than anything he'd ever faced, and for the first time since Emma was born, Jake wasn't sure he was strong enough to protect her. That evening, after Emma had gone back to Mrs. Chen's house for another night away from home, Jake sat in his hospital bed and stared at the case file. The forms asking whether he had adequate financial resources, suitable housing, and the physical capacity to provide care felt like accusations rather than questions. But buried in the bureaucratic language was a deeper question that cut to the core of everything Jake believed about himself. What made a good father? Was it the ability to carry your child when she was tired, or the presence of mind to push her to safety when danger threatened? Was it providing material comfort, or creating emotional security? Was it physical strength, or the strength of love? Jake had always measured his worth as a father by his ability to provide and protect. Now, lying in a hospital bed with legs that would never work again and bills he couldn't pay, he had to find a different definition of strength. He had to believe that love could be enough, even when everything else was falling apart. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Jake held tight to one certainty. He would not give up. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices he had to make, whatever help he had to accept, he would find a way to bring Emma home. He just had no idea that help was already on its way, driven by a mother's guilt and a recognition that sometimes the most unlikely people could save each other. Olivia Langford had always believed that money could solve most problems. At 42, she lived in a world where difficulties were typically resolved, with the right check written to the right person, charity galas attended, private schools funded, political campaigns supported. Her colonial mansion in Hillcrest Estates had been featured in Home, G.A. Garden magazine twice. Her garden designed by the same landscape architect who had worked on the governor's residence. But money couldn't undo the fact that her 17-year-old son Marcus had been texting while driving when he hit Jake Nolan. The confession letter lay on her mahogany desk, written in Marcus's careful handwriting on cream-colored stationery. He had given it to her the night before, his face blotchy from crying, his hands shaking as he placed it in her hands. "Mom, I need to tell you what really happened," the letter began. "I know what I told the police, and I know what Dad's lawyers are saying, but I can't live with lying anymore. I was texting Jessica about the party on Friday. I saw the stop sign, but I was looking at my phone instead of the road. I didn't even try to brake until it was too late. That little girl almost died because I couldn't wait 5 minutes to send a stupid text message. And her dad, he can't walk anymore because of me. Because I was being selfish and careless, and I thought the rules didn't apply to me. Olivia had read the letter 12 times since Marcus gave it to her, each reading making her feel sicker than the last. Her husband, Charles, had immediately called their attorney, discussing strategies for damage control and liability limitation. Their insurance company was handling the legal aspects, offering a settlement that would cover medical expenses and provide some compensation for Jake's pain and suffering. But Olivia couldn't stop thinking about the man who had sacrificed everything to save his daughter. She'd driven past the accident scene twice, studying the skid marks on the asphalt, the damaged stop sign, the small memorial of flowers that neighbors had left. She'd tried to imagine the split second when Jake Nolan had seen Marcus's car racing toward them and made the choice to throw his daughter to safety. "The lawyers say we should minimize contact with the other family," Charles had said over dinner the previous evening, cutting his steak with precise movements. "Let the insurance companies handle everything. These people will try to take advantage if they think we're feeling guilty." "These people?" Olivia had asked, setting down her fork. "You mean the man who was paralyzed, saving his daughter's life?" "I mean people who see an opportunity." Charles had replied coolly. "Working-class family, big medical bills, wealthy defendants. Their lawyer is probably telling them to ask for millions." But Olivia had done her own research. Jake Nolan didn't have a lawyer, couldn't afford one, according to the private investigator she'd hired discreetly. He was facing bankruptcy, potential loss of custody of his daughter, and a future that had been completely destroyed by 30 seconds of her son's carelessness. The investigator's report painted a picture of a man who had built a modest but stable life through hard work and determination. High school graduate, steady employment, no criminal record, no history of neglecting his daughter. Neighbors described him as quiet, responsible, devoted to Emma. Teachers at the elementary school spoke highly of both father and daughter. "He's one of the good ones," Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, had told the investigator. Never missed a parent conference, always volunteered for field trips, made sure Emma had everything she needed, even though you could tell money was tight. That little girl adores him. The high school photo in the investigator's file showed a younger Jake in a football uniform, number 34, holding a helmet under one arm. He'd been handsome in an understated way, green eyes, easy smile, the kind of solid dependability that Olivia had once found attractive before she'd married into wealth and social position. The photo represented everything he'd lost: his physical capabilities, his athletic confidence, his belief that he could handle whatever life threw at him. Marcus found her in her study that morning, staring at the photo and the confession letter spread across her desk. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" he asked quietly, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. Her son looked older than his 17 years. Weight loss and sleepless nights aging his face. "What do you think I should do?" Olivia asked. "I think we should help him," Marcus said without hesitation. "Really help him, not just write a check and hope he goes away." "I ruined his life, Mom. The least we can do is try to fix what we broke." Olivia studied her son's face, seeing genuine remorse rather than the entitled sullenness that had characterized his behavior for the past 2 years. The accident had shaken something loose in Marcus, forced him to confront the consequences of his actions in a way that her lectures and punishments never had. "Your father thinks that would be admitting liability," Olivia said carefully. "Dad thinks everything is about liability and lawsuits and protecting our assets," Marcus said with unusual sharpness. "But this isn't about money. This is about doing what's right." That afternoon, Olivia drove to Regional Medical Center's rehabilitation wing. She didn't go to Jake's room. She wasn't ready for that confrontation yet, but she watched through the window as he worked with his physical therapist. He was struggling to transfer from his wheelchair to a practice bed, his face set with determination despite the obvious pain and frustration. What struck her most was the photo taped to his bedside table. Emma, in a school picture, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning with the unconscious joy of a 6-year-old. Even in the midst of learning to navigate his new reality, Jake's focus was clearly on his daughter. Olivia had always considered herself a good mother, but she knew with uncomfortable honesty that she'd never made the kind of sacrifice Jake had made. She'd never thrown herself in front of danger to protect Marcus. She'd hired bodyguards instead, paid for the best schools, used money and influence to smooth his path. But when the moment came that required pure, selfless love, would she have been brave enough? That evening, she sat in her car outside Jake's duplex on Maple Street, studying the modest home where he'd raised Emma alone. The neighborhood was working class, but well-maintained, with small front yards and older cars in driveways. Children's bikes were scattered on lawns, and she could see the warm glow of kitchen lights in windows as families gathered for dinner. It was a world completely different from her own, yet somehow more authentic. These people worked for everything they had, valued family over status, found happiness in simple pleasures. Jake Nolan had built a life of meaning and purpose, with none of the advantages she'd always taken for granted. Mrs. Chen was watering flowers in the yard next door, and Olivia could see Emma through the kitchen window, sitting at a table doing homework. The little girl looked small and lost, periodically glancing toward the duplex next door, as if hoping her father might suddenly appear. Olivia made her decision sitting in that car, watching an 8-year-old girl who missed her father, and a neighbor who was caring for someone else's child out of simple human kindness. Money couldn't undo what Marcus had done, but it could ensure that Jake Nolan's sacrifice didn't destroy the very thing he'd tried to protect. She would help them not through lawyers and insurance companies, but personally. She would find a way to give Jake back his ability to care for Emma, even if she couldn't give him back his legs. And maybe, in doing so, she could teach her son something about responsibility and redemption that no amount of privilege could provide. The next morning, Olivia began making calls, not to lawyers or insurance adjusters, but to contractors, medical equipment suppliers, and social workers. If Jake Nolan needed his home modified, she would find the best people to do it. If he needed financial stability, she would create opportunities that preserved his dignity. If he needed an advocate in dealing with child services, she would use every connection she had. For the first time since the accident, Olivia felt like she had a purpose beyond maintaining her social position and managing her household. She was going to save a family, and in doing so, perhaps save her son from becoming the kind of entitled young man who believed other people's lives were expendable. Olivia found the high school photo tucked inside Jake's medical file when she visited Dr. Chen's office, using her family's substantial charitable donations to the hospital as leverage for information she probably shouldn't have access to. The faded school portrait showed Jake at 18, wearing his Riverside High football jersey, number 34, his green eyes bright with the confidence of someone who believed the future held nothing but possibilities. The contrast between that young man and the patient she'd observed struggling with basic mobility exercises was heartbreaking. In the photo, Jake stood tall and strong, captain of the football team according to the notation on the back, shoulders broad enough to carry the world. Now those same shoulders were hunched with pain and frustration as he learned to navigate a world designed for people who could walk. He was quite the athlete, Dr. Chen had said, noticing Olivia's interest in the photo. Full scholarship to state, but he gave it up when his girlfriend got pregnant senior year. Married her, got a job, tried to do the right thing. Takes character to make that choice at 18. The story filled in gaps that the private investigator's report had missed. Jake hadn't just been a devoted father since Emma was born. He'd been making sacrifices for her since before she existed. He'd given up college, football, probably dozens of opportunities to build the stable life Emma needed. That evening, Olivia sat in her study, with a growing collection of information about Jake Nolan spread across her desk. High school transcripts showing solid grades, employment records demonstrating 15 years of steady work and gradual advancement, medical records chronicling the devastating extent of his injuries. But it was a child's drawing that affected her most, a crayon picture Emma had made for her father, taped to his hospital bed rail. The drawing showed two stick figures holding hands outside a small house, one tall with dark hair labeled Daddy in careful 8-year-old letters, one small with pigtails labeled Me. Above them, Emma had drawn a rainbow and written, Get well soon in purple crayon. The innocent hope in that drawing, the absolute faith that Daddy would get well and everything would return to normal, made Olivia's chest tight with emotion. Marcus found her there at midnight, still staring at the evidence of a life that his carelessness had shattered. "You've been in here for hours," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "What are you planning?" "I'm trying to understand what we destroyed," Olivia said quietly. "This man wasn't just walking down the street when you hit him. He was walking his daughter home from school, the way he did every Tuesday because her teacher mentioned she seemed sad on the days she walked alone. He left work early, Marcus. He rearranged his schedule because his little girl needed him." Marcus winced, but didn't look away. Since writing his confession letter, he'd stopped trying to avoid the reality of what he'd done. "Dr. Chen says his rehabilitation is going well physically, but he's struggling emotionally," Olivia continued. "He's facing the loss of everything: his career, his home, possibly even custody of Emma. Child Services is evaluating whether he can still provide adequate care." "They'd take Emma away from him?" Marcus asked, his voice strained. "His current housing isn't wheelchair accessible. He's facing bankruptcy from medical bills. He has no job prospects that would allow him to support her." Olivia picked up the high school photo, studying the confident young man who'd had no idea what sacrifice lay ahead. From a bureaucratic standpoint, it makes sense. From a human standpoint, it's devastating. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the full scope of consequences he'd set in motion. "What can we do?" "I've been making calls," Olivia said. "The home modifications alone will cost about $30,000. Ramps, widened doorways, accessible bathroom, first-floor bedroom. Insurance won't cover most of it." "We can pay for that," Marcus said immediately. "It's not just about money," Olivia replied, "though money is part of it. He needs ongoing income, job training for work he can do from a wheelchair, advocacy with Child Services. He needs someone to help him navigate systems he's never had to deal with before." Olivia had spent the week learning about the world Jake now inhabited: disability services, vocational rehabilitation, adaptive equipment. It was a maze of bureaucracy that required patience, persistence, and knowledge that Jake couldn't possibly possess while dealing with his own physical and emotional recovery. "I want to help him directly," she said finally, "not through lawyers or insurance companies or intermediaries. I want to go to him myself and offer real assistance." "Dad will hate that idea," Marcus warned. "Your father thinks liability protection is more important than doing what's right," Olivia said with unusual sharpness. "But I'm not willing to let a good man lose his daughter because my son was texting while driving." The next morning, Olivia drove to Maple Street and parked outside Jake's duplex. Mrs. Chen was in her front yard, hanging laundry on a line stretched between two trees. She was a small, elderly woman with grey hair and tired eyes, clearly feeling the strain of caring for Emma on top of her own responsibilities. "Excuse me," Olivia said, approaching carefully. "I'm Olivia Langford. My son was the driver in the accident that injured Mr. Nolan." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from polite interest to wariness. "I see. I wonder if I could speak with you about Emma and her father's situation," Olivia continued. "I'd like to help, but I want to understand what they really need." Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment, taking in Olivia's expensive clothes and luxury car. "You want to help?" "Yes, not just with money, though that's part of it. I want to help Jake keep Emma and rebuild their life." Something in Olivia's tone must have convinced Mrs. Chen of her sincerity, because the older woman's posture relaxed slightly. Emma is a good child, scared, confused, but good. She misses her father terribly. She asks every day when she can go home. What does she need most? Olivia asked. Stability, Mrs. Chen said without hesitation. Security, the knowledge that her father will be okay and they'll be together. She's lost so much already, her sense of safety, her normal routine, her confidence that adults can protect her. She needs to know that some things in her life are still certain. That afternoon, Olivia visited Emma's school and spoke with Mrs. Rodriguez, who painted a picture of a child struggling to cope with trauma while maintaining faith in her father's ability to fix everything. She's always been such a happy little girl, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Eager to please, works hard, gets along well with other children. But since the accident, she's withdrawn. She has trouble concentrating, sometimes starts crying for no apparent reason. The school counselor is working with her, but what she really needs is to go home to her father. Is there any doubt that Mr. Nolan is a good father? Olivia asked. None whatsoever, Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. Jake Nolan is one of the most devoted parents I've worked with in 20 years of teaching. He's never missed a conference, always volunteers for field trips, knows exactly what's happening in Emma's academic and social life. If they separate that child from her father, it will be a tragedy. Driving home that evening, Olivia felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Marcus's moment of carelessness had created a crisis that threatened to destroy a family, but she was in a position to prevent that destruction. She had resources Jake didn't have: money, connections, knowledge of how to navigate systems and influence decisions. But more than that, she had growing respect for a man who had built something meaningful with less than she spent on clothes each month. Jake Nolan had created a life of purpose and love through hard work and sacrifice. The least she could do was help him preserve what he'd built. That night, Olivia sat down and wrote a letter, not a formal communication through lawyers, but a personal note from one parent to another. She wrote about Marcus's confession, about her own guilt as a mother who had failed to teach her son the value of other people's lives, about her desire to help Jake and Emma rebuild their world. Tomorrow she would deliver the letter herself. Tomorrow she would look Jake Nolan in the eye and offer him something no one expected from the wealthy family whose son had destroyed his life: genuine remorse, personal responsibility, and a commitment to making things right that went far beyond writing a check and walking away. Olivia's handwritten letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered not by a courier or lawyer, but by Olivia herself. Jake was in his wheelchair by the window, watching Mrs. Chen help Emma with her backpack before school when he heard the gentle knock on his hospital room door. The woman who entered was not what he'd expected. He'd imagined someone cold, polished, the type of wealthy person who handled problems through intermediaries. Instead, Olivia Langford looked tired, uncertain, and genuinely nervous. She was well dressed but not flashy, with graying blonde hair and brown eyes that seemed to carry real pain. "Mr. Nolan," she said quietly, "I'm Olivia Langford, Marcus's mother." Jake's first instinct was anger, the hot, consuming rage he'd been carrying for weeks finally having a target. This woman's son had destroyed his life, shattered his daughter's sense of security, and threatened everything he'd worked to build. But something in her expression stopped him from unleashing that fury. "I brought you something," Olivia said, holding out a cream-colored envelope. "It's a letter from me, and one from Marcus. I hope you'll read them." Jake took the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, whether from anger or exhaustion he couldn't tell. "Your lawyers said all communication should go through them." "This isn't about lawyers," Olivia said, settling uninvited into the visitor's chair. "This is about what my son did to your family and what I want to do to help fix it." Jake studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation he'd expected. Rich people didn't just show up to help, they had agendas, angles, ways of protecting themselves while appearing generous. But Olivia Langford looked genuinely distraught, her composure barely holding together. "Why?" Jake asked simply. "Because Marcus was texting while driving," Olivia said, her voice breaking slightly. "Because he saw the stop sign but was looking at his phone instead of the road. Because he almost killed your daughter and left you paralyzed. And all he cared about afterward was whether he'd get suspended from the football team." The raw honesty in her voice hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd known the accident wasn't really an accident. Witnesses had mentioned the driver seemed distracted, but hearing it confirmed by the boy's own mother made his chest tight with renewed anger. "He wrote you a confession," Olivia continued, nodding toward the envelope. "The truth about what happened, not the sanitized version the lawyers want him to tell. He's 17, Mr. Nolan. Old enough to drive, old enough to take responsibility for his actions, but still young enough to learn from them." Jake opened the envelope with careful movements, his hands still not entirely steady. Marcus's letter was written in the careful handwriting of someone who knew words mattered. "Mr. Nolan, I know nothing I write can undo what I did to you and Emma. I was texting my girlfriend about a stupid party when I should have been watching the road. I saw the stop sign, but I was looking at my phone. I didn't even try to brake until it was too late. You threw yourself in front of a car to save your daughter's life, and I'm the reason you had to. I'm the reason you can't walk anymore. I'm the reason Emma has nightmares and asks why bad things happen to good people. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I did. I understand that actions have consequences, and that my 30 seconds of selfishness changed your whole life. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but I am sorry. More sorry than I've ever been about anything." Olivia's letter was longer, more detailed, but equally direct. She wrote about her own failure as a mother, about raising a son who believed rules didn't apply to him, about the guilt that consumed her when she thought about Jake pushing Emma to safety. But more than that, she wrote about a plan. "I want to help you rebuild your life," the letter continued. "Not just with money, though that's part of it. I want to modify your home so you can live independently with Emma. I want to help you find work that utilizes your skills and experience. I want to advocate with child services so they understand you're the same devoted father you've always been. I want to help because it's the right thing to do, but also because I need my son to understand that when you hurt someone, you don't just write a check and walk away. You do whatever it takes to make things right." Jake read both letters twice, his emotions cycling through anger, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. This wasn't what he'd expected from the wealthy family whose son had destroyed his life. He'd expected lawyers, settlements, attempts to minimize their responsibility. Instead, he was holding a genuine apology and an offer of comprehensive help. "Why should I trust you?" Jake asked finally, looking up at Olivia. "Because I'm not offering to fix this from a distance," she said. "I'm offering to get personally involved, to learn what you need and help you get it, to use whatever connections and resources I have to ensure you can keep Emma and rebuild your life." "And what do you get out of it?" Jake asked, still suspicious. "The chance to teach my son about real responsibility," Olivia said. "The opportunity to show him that privilege comes with obligations, not just benefits." And maybe her voice caught slightly, the chance to do something meaningful instead of just attending charity galas and writing checks to causes I know nothing about. Jake studied her face, seeing something he hadn't expected, genuine respect for what he'd accomplished as a father and a man. Olivia Langford, despite her wealth and social position, seemed to understand that he'd built something valuable through hard work and sacrifice. "I've been researching what you need," Olivia continued. "Home modifications, adaptive equipment, vocational training, legal advocacy with child services. I've contacted contractors, therapists, social workers. I've learned enough to know this isn't something money alone can fix. It requires time, attention, and someone who understands the system." "And you want to be that someone?" Jake asked. "I want to try," Olivia said simply. "I want to help you and Emma, and I want Marcus to see what it means to take real responsibility for your actions." For the first time since the accident, Jake felt something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. Not just hope for financial help, but hope for the kind of comprehensive support that could actually make a difference. Olivia Langford wasn't offering charity, she was offering partnership in rebuilding his life. "What's the catch?" Jake asked, because experience had taught him that generous offers usually came with strings attached. "No catch," Olivia said. "No legal agreements, no requirement that you not sue us, no publicity. Just a mother trying to help her son understand the difference between taking responsibility and avoiding consequences." Jake looked down at the letters in his hands, then out the window where he could see Emma walking to school with Mrs. Chen, her small hand clutched tightly in the older woman's palm. His daughter needed stability, security, the assurance that they would be together. If Olivia Langford could help provide that, did it matter that her son was the one who had destroyed their life in the first place? "What do you want me to do?" Jake asked quietly. "Let me help," Olivia said. "Let me show Marcus what real accountability looks like, and let me try to give you back the ability to be the father Emma needs." For the first time in weeks, Jake allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they might find a way through this nightmare, after all. The custody hearing notice arrived on a cold Monday morning in November, exactly 6 weeks after Olivia had walked into Jake's hospital room with her handwritten letter. The official document, stamped with the county seal and bearing the imposing letterhead of family court, set a date that would determine whether Jake could keep Emma. December 15th, 2:00 p.m. Judge Margaret Sullivan presiding. Jake stared at the paper with hands that had grown steadier over the past month, thanks to Olivia's comprehensive rehabilitation plan. She had arranged for the best physical therapists, occupational specialists, and adaptive equipment money could buy. His wheelchair was now a lightweight titanium model that moved like an extension of his body. His upper body strength had improved dramatically through targeted exercises designed specifically for his new reality. But legal documents still had the power to make him feel helpless. "We're going to be ready," Olivia said, reading over his shoulder in the living room of his transformed duplex. The renovation had been completed in 3 weeks by a crew of contractors who worked with the efficiency that only unlimited funding could provide. Ramps replaced steps, doorways had been widened, the bathroom redesigned with roll-in shower and accessible fixtures. The kitchen counters had been lowered, cabinets reorganized, everything modified to accommodate Jake's wheelchair while maintaining the warm, homey feel Emma loved. "Are we?" Jake asked, gesturing toward the stack of documents they'd been preparing. Financial statements, medical records, character references, employment prospects, everything the court would examine to determine his fitness as a parent. "Look at this objectively, Olivia. I'm a paralyzed single father with limited income prospects and a completely transformed living situation. From their perspective, how is this in Emma's best interest?" Olivia settled onto the couch beside his wheelchair, her own transformation over the past month as dramatic as Jake's. The polished society matron had been replaced by someone more genuine, more grounded. She wore jeans and sweaters now, instead of designer suits, spent her days advocating for Jake instead of attending committee meetings, and had developed real relationships with Emma and the neighbors who had become their support network. "Because you're still the same father you've always been," she said firmly. "The accident changed your mobility, not your heart, not your dedication to Emma, not your ability to provide love and guidance and security." Jake wasn't entirely convinced, but Olivia's advocacy had been extraordinary. She had hired the best disability rights attorney in the state, Dr. Patricia Vance, a woman who specialized in custody cases involving disabled parents. She had documented Jake's progress in rehabilitation, his successful adaptation to wheelchair use, and his unchanged capacity for parenting. More importantly, she had created a support system that addressed every concern child services might raise. Mrs. Chen had agreed to provide backup childcare when needed. The school had been briefed on Emma's situation and Jake's continued ability to participate in her education. A job had been arranged with a construction consulting firm that would allow Jake to work from home, reviewing building plans and providing expert analysis work that utilized his 15 years of experience while accommodating his physical limitations. "Emma's the wild card," Jake said, voicing the fear that kept him awake at night. "They're going to ask her questions, want to know how she feels about my disability, whether she feels safe, whether she understands what's changed." Emma had been remarkable through the transition. She'd accepted Jake's wheelchair matter-of-factly, adapted to their modified routines without complaint, and seemed genuinely excited about the improvements to their home. But she was still 8 years old, still processing trauma, still occasionally waking up, crying from nightmares about the accident. "She loves you," Olivia said simply. "That's going to come through, no matter what questions they ask." Over the past month, Olivia had become more than an advocate. She'd become family. She brought groceries and cooked dinner with Emma, helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences alongside Jake. Her own relationship with Marcus had improved dramatically as he'd watched his mother take real responsibility for the consequences of his actions. Marcus himself had changed profoundly. He spent afternoons at the duplex, initially as community service ordered by the juvenile court, but increasingly because he genuinely wanted to help. He'd learned to assist Jake with physical therapy exercises, helped Emma with math homework, and gradually developed a tentative friendship with both of them. "I keep waiting for the catch," Jake admitted to Olivia one evening as they watched Emma and Marcus work on a puzzle at the kitchen table. "People like you don't just adopt broken families out of guilt." "People like me?" Olivia asked, raising an eyebrow. "Wealthy, connected, used to solving problems with money and moving on." Olivia was quiet for a moment, watching her son patiently explain long division to Emma. "You know what I realized about my life? I was very good at writing checks to worthy causes, but I'd never actually helped anyone. I'd never gotten my hands dirty, never invested myself personally in making someone's life better. What we're doing here, this is the most meaningful thing I've done in 20 years. The transformation went both ways. Jake had learned to accept help without feeling diminished, to see Olivia's assistance as partnership rather than charity. She had resources and connections he lacked. He had practical knowledge and parenting wisdom she'd never developed. Together, they'd created something neither could have accomplished alone. Dr. Vance had been cautiously optimistic about their chances in court. "Legally, they can't discriminate based on disability," she'd explained during their preparation meetings. "The question is whether Jake can provide adequate care for Emma, not whether he can walk. We've documented his successful adaptation, his support system, his continued ability to meet Emma's needs. But legal theory and courtroom reality were different things. Judge Sullivan was known for conservative decisions that prioritized traditional family structures. The prosecutor representing child services would argue that Emma deserved a two-parent household, financial security, a father who could chase away nighttime fears by walking to her bedroom. "What scares me most," Jake confided to Olivia the night before the hearing, "is that they might be right. Maybe Emma would be better off with a family that can give her things I can't anymore." "Like what?" Olivia asked. "Safety, financial security, two parents, a father who can teach her to ride a bike, walk her down the aisle at her wedding, carry her if she gets hurt." "Jake," Olivia said gently, "you threw yourself in front of a car to save her life. You spent 15 years working construction to support her alone. You've learned to navigate a completely new way of living so you could keep being her father. What more proof does anyone need that you'd do anything for that little girl?" The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. Emma woke early and climbed into Jake's bed. a routine they'd maintained despite all the other changes in their lives. "Are you nervous about today?" she asked, curling up against his side. "A little," Jake admitted. "Are you?" "A little. But Mrs. Olivia says the judge just wants to make sure I'm happy and safe, and I am." Emma looked up at him with those green eyes that mirrored his own. "You're still my daddy, right? Even though you use a wheelchair now?" "I'll always be your daddy," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter what." As they got ready for court, Jake reflected on how much their lives had changed in just a few months. The accident had destroyed everything he'd thought, defined him, his physical capabilities, his financial independence, his ability to handle problems alone. But it had also revealed things he hadn't known about himself: his capacity to accept help, his ability to build new kinds of relationships, his understanding that strength came in many forms. Whether the court would see it that way remained to be determined. In 4 hours, Judge Sullivan would decide whether Jake's love for Emma was enough to overcome society's assumptions about disability and parenting. Everything they'd built together, their modified home, their support system, their unconventional but genuine family, would be evaluated by people who had never seen them together, never witnessed the daily reality of their lives. But as Jake watched Emma help Olivia pack a lunch for the courthouse, as he saw Marcus carefully load his wheelchair into the van they'd borrowed for the occasion, he realized that whatever the judge decided, they'd already won something important. They'd proven that families came in all configurations, that healing could happen in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the people who seemed least likely to help each other could create something beautiful together. The hearing would determine Emma's legal custody, but it couldn't change the bonds they'd forged through crisis and recovery. Whatever happened, they would face it together. Judge Margaret Sullivan's courtroom smelled of polished wood and the nervous sweat of people whose lives hung in the balance. Jake sat in his wheelchair at the defendant's table, his father's wedding ring, the only inheritance from a man who'd abandoned his family when Jake was 12, tight on his finger. He'd worn it every day since Emma was born, a reminder of the kind of father he was determined never to become. Dr. Patricia Vance, their attorney, had arranged her papers with military precision. Across the aisle, the child services lawyer, a stern woman named Margaret Collins, reviewed her own files with the confidence of someone who rarely lost custody cases. Emma sat in the gallery between Olivia and Marcus, wearing her best dress and the blue cardigan that had become too small but which she refused to give up. She'd insisted on coming despite Dr. Vance's suggestion that children her age were usually interviewed separately, away from the formal courtroom setting. "I want to tell the judge myself," Emma had said with 8-year-old determination. "I want her to know that Daddy is still Daddy." Judge Sullivan entered precisely at 2:00 p.m., her grey hair pulled back severely and her expression unreadable. She was known throughout the county as fair but traditional, someone who believed children needed stability above all else. Jake's fate and Emma's future rested in the hands of a woman who had never met them before today. "This is a custody evaluation hearing for Emma Nolan, age 8, Judge Sullivan began, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades on the bench. "We're here to determine whether Jacob Nolan can continue to provide adequate care for his daughter following his disability from a motor vehicle accident." The clinical language made Jake wince. Disability from a motor vehicle accident reduced the most heroic moment of his life to a bureaucratic footnote. Ms. Collins presented the state's case with methodical efficiency. Financial concerns, housing modifications that might not be sustainable long-term, the physical limitations that came with paraplegia, the lack of family support systems. She painted a picture of a man struggling to adapt to circumstances beyond his control, circumstances that might compromise his ability to parent effectively. "Mr. Nolan faces significant challenges that didn't exist before his injury," Collins argued. "While his love for Emma is not in question, love alone cannot provide the stability and security a child needs. The court must consider what's in Emma's best long-term interests, not what's most convenient for the father." Each point hit Jake like a physical blow. Everything Collins said was technically true. He did face new challenges. He was still learning to navigate his disability. His financial situation remained precarious despite Olivia's help. But the cold recitation of facts missed the essence of who he was as a father. Dr. Vance's response was passionate and comprehensive. She presented evidence of Jake's successful adaptation, his strong support network, his continued ability to meet Emma's emotional and physical needs. Character witnesses testified about his devotion as a father, his work ethic, his role in the community. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about Jake's involvement in Emma's education. "In 20 years of teaching, I've never worked with a more engaged parent," she said. "Mr. Nolan knows every detail of Emma's academic progress, her friendships, her concerns. The accident didn't change his attention to her needs. If anything, it increased it." Mrs. Chen testified about the daily reality of their relationship. "I see them together every day," she said in her careful English. "Emma helps him sometimes, yes, but he still takes care of her. He still helps with homework, still makes her lunch, still reads bedtime stories. The wheelchair doesn't change love." Dr. Patel, Jake's rehabilitation physician, explained the extent of his recovery and his prognosis for independent living. "Mr. Nolan has made remarkable progress," he told the court. "He's regained full use of his upper body, learned to drive with hand controls, and demonstrated complete independence in activities of daily living. His disability does not impair his cognitive function, his judgment, or his capacity for nurturing." But it was Olivia's testimony that surprised everyone, including Jake. She hadn't been scheduled to speak. Her involvement in the case was potentially problematic, given that her son was responsible for Jake's injuries. But Dr. Vance had decided her perspective was too valuable to ignore. "Mrs. Langford," Judge Sullivan said, "your family's role in this situation is unusual, to say the least. Why are you advocating for Mr. Nolan's custody of Emma?" Olivia stood straight, her hands clasped in front of her. "Because I've had the privilege of watching him be a father over the past few months, Your Honor. I've seen how he adapts his methods without changing his dedication. I've watched Emma thrive under his care, even during the most difficult period of both their lives. But surely you understand that your son's actions created this crisis," Judge Sullivan pressed. "Doesn't Mr. Nolan's situation demonstrate exactly why Emma might need alternative placement?" "With respect, Your Honor, my son's actions created a medical crisis. They didn't create a parenting crisis." Olivia's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Jake Nolan was an exceptional father before the accident, and he remains an exceptional father afterward. He simply learned to parent from a wheelchair instead of on his feet." The judge turned to Jake, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Nolan, this court recognizes your sacrifice in protecting your daughter during the accident. No one questions your love for Emma or your desire to remain her guardian. But the court must consider practical realities. How do you respond to concerns about your ability to provide adequate supervision and care?" Jake had prepared for this moment, rehearsed his response with Dr. Vance dozens of times. But sitting in the formal courtroom, wearing his only suit, and facing the woman who would decide his future, the words he'd practiced seemed inadequate. "Your Honor, I won't pretend the accident didn't change things," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I can't run after Emma if she's in danger, can't carry her if she's hurt, can't reach high shelves or climb playground equipment. But I can still hold her when she's scared, help her with homework, teach her right from wrong, and love her unconditionally." He paused, glancing back at Emma, whose green eyes were fixed on him with absolute trust. "The accident took away my legs, but it didn't take away what makes me her father. I'm still the same man who taught her to tie her shoes, who knows she's afraid of thunderstorms but loves roller coasters, who can tell when she's getting sick before she knows it herself. Emma doesn't need a father who can walk. She needs a father who will never give up on her, who will always put her first, who will love her enough to adapt to whatever life throws at them." The courtroom was silent as Jake finished speaking. Judge Sullivan made notes on her legal pad, her expression giving nothing away. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present: Emma's future, Jake's identity as a father, the unconventional family they'd all helped create. Judge Sullivan's chambers were smaller than Jake had expected, lined with law books and family photos that humanized the woman who held Emma's fate in her hands. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge had called for a brief recess to interview Emma privately, a conversation that would carry enormous weight in her final decision. Emma sat in the oversized chair across from Judge Sullivan's desk, her legs swinging freely, the blue cardigan making her look even smaller than usual. In her lap, she held a crayon drawing she'd made the night before: 2 stick figures, one tall in a wheelchair, one small with pigtails, standing in front of a house with a rainbow overhead. "Emma, do you know why we're here today?" Judge Sullivan asked gently. Her formal courtroom demeanor softened for the 8-year-old who would be most affected by whatever decision she made. "Yes, ma'am. You have to decide if I can stay with my daddy," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Mrs. Patricia said you might have questions for me." "I do have some questions. Is that okay?" Emma nodded, clutching her drawing tighter. "How do you feel about the changes in your life since your father's accident?" the judge began. "Sad sometimes," Emma said honestly. "I was really scared when Daddy got hurt. I thought he might die, and then I'd be all alone. But he didn't die, and we're still together. So now I'm mostly happy again." "Are you afraid of your father now, because of his wheelchair?" Emma looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Afraid of Daddy? No, ma'am. Why would I be afraid of him? Some children feel scared when their parents have big changes like this." "Oh." Emma considered this seriously. "I was scared at first because I didn't understand what a wheelchair was. But then Daddy explained that it's just a different way to move around, like how some people wear glasses to see better. Now I think it's kind of cool because I can ride on the back sometimes." Judge Sullivan made notes, her expression thoughtful. "Do you feel like your father can take care of you the way he used to?" "He takes better care of me now," Emma said without hesitation. "Before the accident, Daddy was always working and tired. Now he's home more, and we do homework together every day, and Mrs. Olivia helps us cook dinner, and Marcus shows me how to do math problems." Mrs. Olivia and Marcus, they're the family of the boy who was driving the car that hurt your father. How do you feel about them?" Emma's face grew serious, and she was quiet for a moment before answering. "Marcus made a big mistake, and he feels really sorry about it. He cries sometimes when he thinks no one is looking. But he's trying to make it better by helping us. Mrs. Olivia says that's what good people do when they mess up. They don't just say sorry. They try to fix what they broke." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Do you understand what happened to your father in the accident?" "Yes, ma'am. The car hit him and hurt his back so his legs don't work anymore. But his arms still work, and his brain still works, and his heart still works." Emma touched her chest. "The important parts are all still the same." "Are there things your father can't do for you now that he used to do?" Emma thought carefully. "He can't carry me upstairs anymore, but our bedroom is downstairs now, and it's bigger than my old one. He can't push me on the high swings at the playground, but Marcus does that, and Daddy still watches and cheers. He can't reach the top shelf in the kitchen, but Mrs. Chen showed me how to use the step stool safely, so now I can help him. Do you ever wish you could live with a different family, one where both parents could walk?" The question hung in the air, and Emma's face scrunched up in confusion. "Why would I want a different family? Daddy is my family. We belong together." "But what if there was a family that could give you things your father can't?" "Like what? Maybe more money, or a bigger house, or a—" "Judge lady," Emma interrupted politely but firmly, "I don't need more money or a bigger house. I need my daddy. He's the one who knows that I like my sandwiches cut in triangles, not squares. He's the one who checks for monsters under my bed, even though he knows they're not real because I need him to check. He's the one who makes up stories about princess construction workers when I can't sleep." Emma slid down from the chair and approached the judge's desk, holding up her drawing. "This is us at our new house. See? Daddy's in his wheelchair and I'm holding his hand, and we're both smiling because we're together. Mrs. Olivia helped me spell family at the top." Judge Sullivan studied the drawing, two figures, clearly happy despite the wheelchair, under a rainbow that Emma had colored with obvious care. "Emma, if I let you stay with your father, do you promise to tell someone if you ever feel unsafe or if you need help that he can't provide?" "Yes, ma'am, but Daddy always keeps me safe. That's what daddies do." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Sullivan took her place behind the bench with an expression that revealed nothing. Jake felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he waited for the words that would determine whether he'd wake up tomorrow as Emma's father or as a man who'd lost everything that mattered. "This court has considered all testimony and evidence presented today," Judge Sullivan began. "The state has raised legitimate concerns about Mr. Nolan's changed circumstances and his ability to provide adequate care for Emma. However, after careful consideration and private interview with the child, this court finds that Mr. Nolan's disability does not impair his capacity for effective parenting." Jake felt Olivia's hand squeeze his shoulder as relief began to flood through him. Emma Nolan is clearly a well-adjusted, loved child who has adapted remarkably well to her father's changed circumstances. Her testimony demonstrates a mature understanding of the situation and unwavering confidence in her father's ability to care for her. The support system that has developed around this family, while unconventional, appears to be stable and beneficial to the child's well-being. The judge paused, looking directly at Jake. "Mr. Nolan, this court is impressed by your determination to remain an active, engaged father despite significant challenges. Your adaptation to your new circumstances while maintaining Emma's stability speaks to your character and dedication." Jake could barely breathe as he waited for the final verdict. "Therefore, this court orders that custody of Emma Nolan shall remain with her father, Jacob Nolan, with continued monitoring by Child Services for a period of 6 months to ensure the adequacy of care arrangements." The gavel fell with a sound that seemed to echo through Jake's entire body. Emma jumped up from her seat in the gallery and ran to him, launching herself into his lap with the unrestrained joy of a child who had never doubted that she belonged with her father. "We did it, Daddy," she whispered against his neck. "We get to stay together." Behind them, Olivia was crying openly, and Marcus was grinning with the relief of someone who had helped repair what he'd broken. Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, and even Dr. Vance allowed herself a small smile of professional satisfaction. Judge Sullivan remained seated as the courtroom slowly emptied, watching the unconventional family celebrate their victory. Sometimes, she reflected, justice wasn't about following precedent or maintaining traditional structures. Sometimes it was about recognizing that love could adapt to any circumstance, and that the bonds between parent and child were stronger than any disability or hardship. Emma was going home with her father, where she belonged. 6 months after the custody hearing, Jake sat in his wheelchair on the front porch of the duplex on Maple Street, watching Emma and Marcus work together in the small front garden they'd planted in the spring. The morning sun was warm on his face, and the sound of Emma's laughter as she discovered a tomato that had ripened overnight filled him with the kind of contentment he'd thought was lost forever. The new family photo sat on the kitchen table inside a professional portrait that Olivia had insisted on commissioning. In it, Jake sat in his wheelchair with Emma on his lap, while Olivia and Marcus stood behind them, all 4 of them smiling with the easy familiarity of people who had chosen to become family. It wasn't the traditional nuclear family that society expected, but it was theirs, built from tragedy and held together by love, forgiveness, and the recognition that healing could take many forms. "Dad, look," Emma called out, holding up a cherry tomato like a precious gem. "It's perfect." "Bring it here," Jake called back. "We'll add it to lunch." Emma ran to him, dirt under her fingernails, and happiness radiating from every inch of her small frame. She'd grown over the past months, not just physically but emotionally, developing a confidence that came from having weathered a crisis and emerged stronger. The nightmares had stopped, her grades had improved, and she'd made new friends who accepted her family's unique configuration without question. Marcus approached more slowly, pushing a wheelbarrow full of weeds with the careful attention to detail he brought to everything now. The careless teenager who had been texting while driving had been replaced by a young man who understood that actions had consequences, that privilege came with responsibility, that redemption required more than apologies. Mrs. Patterson's cat had 3 more kittens, Marcus reported, settling onto the porch steps. Emma wants to name them all, but Mrs. Patterson says she can only name one. Which one? Jake asked, knowing that Emma had probably already made her choice. The little grey one with white paws, Emma said, climbing onto Jake's lap with the unconscious ease of a child who had never doubted her welcome there. I want to call her Hope. Jake exchanged a meaningful look with Marcus over Emma's head. Hope seemed like an appropriate name for something small and vulnerable that had entered their lives after a period of darkness. Olivia emerged from the house carrying a pitcher of lemonade and wearing the kind of casual clothes she'd never owned before, becoming part of their unconventional family. Her transformation had been as complete as anyone's, from society matron focused on appearances to a woman invested in the daily reality of helping raise a child and supporting a friend. The job interview went well, she announced, settling into the chair beside Jake's wheelchair. They want you to start Monday if you're interested. The consulting position with Heritage Construction was perfect for Jake's skills and limitations, reviewing building plans, providing safety assessments, training younger workers in best practices. It utilized 15 years of construction experience while allowing him to work primarily from home, with occasional site visits in a company vehicle modified with hand controls. I'm interested, Jake said, feeling the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with meaningful work. It'll be good to feel useful again. You've always been useful, Emma said loyally, leaning back against his chest. You're useful to me every single day. The simple statement, delivered with 8-year-old certainty, carried more weight than any professional accomplishment ever could. Jake had learned over the past months that his worth wasn't measured by his ability to climb scaffolding or carry heavy loads. It was measured by his capacity to love, guide, and protect the daughter who trusted him completely. Marcus had started his senior year of high school with a new sense of purpose, volunteering with a local disability advocacy group and planning to study rehabilitation counseling in college. His relationship with his parents had improved dramatically as he'd watched his mother become genuinely involved in helping others rather than simply writing checks to distant causes. I've been thinking, Marcus said, pulling Emma's attention away from the tomato she was examining. When you start high school, you should take auto shop. Learn how cars really work, so you'll never make the stupid mistakes I made. I'm only 8, Emma pointed out. High school is like a million years away. 10 years, Jake corrected, marveling at how that span of time no longer felt overwhelming. There had been a period after the accident when he couldn't imagine getting through a single day, let alone planning for Emma's teenage years. Now, the future stretched ahead full of possibilities rather than fears. The duplex on Maple Street had been transformed but remained recognizably theirs. The ramps and wider doorways were integrated so seamlessly that visitors barely noticed the modifications. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, Jake's construction awards hung in the living room, and Olivia's contributions, better cookware, updated appliances, comfortable furniture had been chosen to enhance rather than replace what they'd built together. Mrs. Chen appeared in her front yard, waving a manila envelope. Jake, this came to my address by mistake. The envelope contained Emma's report card, straight A's, and a note from Mrs. Rodriguez, praising her improvement in both academic performance and social interaction. Emma had not only recovered from the trauma of the accident, but had thrived in the stability that followed. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," Jake said, kissing the top of Emma's head. "I had good help," Emma said matter-of-factly. "You and Mrs. Olivia and Marcus all helped me with different subjects. Mrs. Chen taught me multiplication tables in Chinese, which was really hard but really cool." As the afternoon wore on, their extended neighborhood family gathered for the Sunday dinner that had become tradition. Mrs. Chen brought homemade soup. Mr. Rodriguez contributed fresh bread from his weekend baking, and the Williamses, from across the street, arrived with their twin boys, who adored Emma and treated Jake's wheelchair as perfectly normal. Watching Emma help serve dinner, Jake reflected on how much their definition of family had expanded. The accident that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, the start of relationships that enriched their lives in ways he could never have imagined. Olivia's guilt had led to genuine friendship. Marcus's mistakes had fostered real growth, and the community's support had created a network of care that made them all stronger. After dinner, as Emma worked on a puzzle with the Williams boys and the adults shared coffee on the porch, Olivia turned to Jake with the expression she wore when she was about to say something important. "I have a confession," she said quietly. "When I first came to the hospital, I thought I was helping you out of guilt and obligation. I thought once you were back on your feet, so to speak, my job would be done." "And now?" Jake asked. "Now I realize you all saved me as much as I helped you," Olivia said. "I was living this empty life of charity, galas and committee meetings, writing checks to causes I didn't understand. Being part of your family, watching Emma grow, seeing Marcus become the man I always hoped he could be, this is the most meaningful thing I've ever done." Marcus looked up from where he was helping Emma with a particularly difficult section of the puzzle. "Mom's right. Before the accident, I thought the world revolved around me. I thought other people were just background characters in my story. Now I understand that everyone matters, that every choice has consequences, that being privileged means you have a responsibility to help." Jake nodded, understanding the transformation Marcus described. His own perspective had shifted just as dramatically. The accident had stripped away his physical capabilities and financial independence, but it had revealed strengths he hadn't known he possessed, and opened his life to relationships he'd never expected. As evening approached and their neighbors headed home, Emma climbed back onto Jake's lap for the bedtime story ritual that had survived every change in their lives. Tonight's story was about a brave knight who used a special chariot instead of a horse, a princess who was excellent at math, and a dragon who turned out to be friendly once someone took the time to understand him. "Is this story about us?" Emma asked sleepily. "All the best stories are about us, in one way or another," Jake said, wheeling them both toward the house. Later, after Emma was asleep, and Olivia and Marcus had gone home to their own house, where they'd learned to be a real family, instead of just people who shared an address, Jake sat in his living room and looked at the family photo on the side table. The four faces smiling back at him represented something unprecedented in his experience. A chosen family built from crisis, held together by forgiveness, and strengthened by the recognition that love could adapt to any circumstance. The accident had ended one version of his life, but it had begun another that was richer, more connected, and more meaningful than anything he could have planned. Emma was thriving. Marcus was growing into a young man of character. Olivia had found purpose beyond social obligations, and Jake had discovered that strength came in many forms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did, but they would face them together. This unconventional family that had learned that sometimes the most beautiful things grew from the most broken soil. Jake Nolan was still Emma's father, still her protector and guide, still the man who would sacrifice everything for her safety and happiness. He just did it all from a wheelchair now, surrounded by people who had taught him that the most important journeys in life had nothing to do with walking.